Peter Sellars is possessed by Mr Kite. Peter Sellars, CBE, born Peter Richard Henry Sellars, 8th of September 1925 to the 24th of July 1980, aged 55, was an English film actor, comedian, occasional director and singer, described now as a genius. He was both a superb character actor but also a masterful comic actor, who is possibly best known for his portrayal of Chief Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther series of films. He was a founding member of the Goons, along with Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe, and in total he made about 54 major films. Even his early films, such as The Lady Killers in 1956, The Smallest Show on Earth of 1957, and The Mouse That Roared 1959, have stood the test of time. I'm All Right, Jack, in 1959, directed by John Bolting, was a milestone for him as a character actor playing a serious role, as opposed to a comic role. For his role as Fred Kite, he won a British Academy Film Award for Best British Actor. Near-death experiences. Peter started suffering from heart problems well before 1964, which was his first major diagnosed crisis. On the 5th of April 1964, hoping to improve his sexual performance with his then-wife Britt Eklund, he took isobutyl nitrite. Not long afterwards, he suffered chest pains and was taken to the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. At 4:32 a.m. on the 7th of April 1964, his heart stopped for 1.5 minutes. 7 more times it stopped, the near-death experience. The repeated act of dying became for Sellars a pivotal point in his life, but it did not begin his spiritual interests, it simply intensified them. A life immersed in the occult, mediums, clairvoyants, and astrologers. Although many have attributed Peter's intense interest in the occult to his near-death experience, he needed no NDE to be convinced of the existence of spirits. Alexander Walker, Peter Sellars. One friend of Sellars was a boy called Terry Roberts. His mother, Estelle Roberts, was a medium. She was said to break off conversations with people and to address the empty air near her with, "What are you saying?" His mother, Peg, had dabbled in spiritualism in the chatty backstreet circle of friends and acquaintances who met in the parlour to establish contact with the dear departed. But it wasn't till well after the war that Sellars started consulting mediums with any regularity and seriousness. Film producers even submitted their ideas and scripts to Peter's spiritual advisors. Dennis Selinger complained that he ended up living his life via omens and auguries. Peter had an intense dislike of Orson Welles, for example, describing Welles as a bad witch. Welles had a reputation as a very skillful conjurer and illusionist, talents which in the olden days were associated with dark powers. He feared Welles would penetrate his psyche, and he didn't want to be hexed. Peter also regularly consulted his astrologer, almost daily. The influence of India. But these influences were tempered by his attraction to India. Peter was posted to India, Ceylon and Burma as part of the gang show. He said, "I was greatly attracted to the placidness of the Indians. I was a pessimist, and Indians seemed bursting with optimism." In a much later interview, he also said, "I'm attracted to them, whether it is to a certain idiosyncrasy or the warmth of their personality or character. At the time, I was too young to know." And just as Pete Townshend of The Who was saved by Meher Baba, see our video on Pete Townshend, and David Lynch became an avid practitioner of transcendental meditation, founding the David Lynch Foundation to fund the teaching of TM in schools and to at-risk populations, including the homeless and veterans and refugees. Peter Sellars became involved in yoga and took it seriously. When in Rhodesia, he even put his yoga to the test by chanting a mantra his Swami had taught him at a bull elephant that had charged him. It apparently worked and calmed the animal down. Peter immersed himself in Eastern philosophy. He took to sitting cross-legged and barefooted on the floor. At the time, he said, "Yoga has given me a tranquility I wouldn't have thought possible." And via yoga and spiritual practices, he managed to partly, though not entirely, water down the consequences of his childhood. A lonely, dysfunctional childhood dominated by his controlling, obsessive mother and lack of any stability, security or home. When his parents left him alone outside pubs whilst they drank inside and left him with landladies while they were working, the trauma resulted in periods of mania marked by spending sprees on cars costing eye-watering amounts of money he could not afford, appalling bouts of depression when he considered suicide, and sunk into periods of paranoia and delusion. Obsessive attractions to women. He wanted to be mother substitutes, beautiful, sexy and charismatic, all at the same time. For example, he had crushes that sometimes lasted only days, like the one he had on Lisa Mullally, and would fantasize about women who did not know they had become part of his fantasy, like Princess Margaret. Women who were married and were entirely unattracted to him, like Sophia Loren, and women half his age. Peter's dysfunctional childhood left him a hypochondriac and an attention seeker, but the drugs he took were over-the-counter pills and potions, and were never likely to lead to the possession Henri Michaud experienced. See the video on Henri Michaud. But it did not manage to protect him from the one thing that in the end created the genius actor: possession.
To get the audience warmed up.
Possession.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, there is no better way than by the gentlemen using their right hand to squeeze the top of the lady's thigh next to them.
Many people remark that when Peter played any part, he became that person. He lived, acted, and slept that personality. Peter did not have multiple personality disorder, as in this a personality takes over completely from the main personality and forms separate memories, inaccessible to the other personalities. Peter never lost his memories. It was not past life recall, even though for a time Peter himself considered this possibility, because Peter was not recalling events from a previous life. In the end, Peter himself did consider the possibility that he was possessed by a spirit entity with a personality matching the description of the role he had to play. It was the Baltings who first noticed this somewhat disconcerting feature of Peter's characters. The character grew in the actual shooting, and the transformation stuck to Sellars even when he was off the set. When the film character was possessing Sellars, his first wife, Anne, said she was never quite sure who might be returning home that night. Sometimes it was a stranger, whose trance-like state she was powerless to break, and not a little scared to behold. Peter's traumatised state and the high tension he was in as he tried to develop a part would have left him extremely open to this form of spiritual experience. Writers appear to be able to create characters that also have a life of their own. Charles Dickens was able to do this. He once said that the characters told his stories, not him. The filming of Mr Kite, from Peter Sellars, the official biography by Alexander Walker. The Baltings lost no time in kindling his enthusiasm for the part. They were writing especially for him in their next film. According to John, he was over the moon at the prospect of playing Fred Kite, the trade union leader and factory floor's abominable no man. In a satire on British management and labour practices entitled I'm All Right, Jack, the Baltings sent him the script by a special messenger. With only the briefest of pauses, it came back. As quickly, Sellars had turned it down. The Baltings were incredulous, then furious. Didn't he trust their judgment? Or didn't he trust his own ability when it came to playing a role that merged with the social texture of the satire, instead of having a comic frame put round it? They knew it was the latter. When Sellars explained he'd read the script the whole way through and couldn't find the laughs, the gags. But this was only an excuse. He couldn't yet see the character, and whenever that happened he got very insecure. John Balting had him down to his country house one Sunday for a working supper. I determined to be at my most insinuating, not to say insidious, subtly, patiently undermining all his objections. But these grew as the night wore on, and finally midnight came and went. Sellars desperately needed a marathon effort in confidence building so that he would believe he could act the part. Sultans, prime ministers were simpler figures of fun. Fred Kite was outside his experience, and he feared beyond his capacities. He kept on hedging by saying it wasn't a big enough role. Peter, I grant you that, John Balting said, infinitely patient with him. It is not, but it is the one that will get most attention if you play it. Eventually, at 1:30 a.m. on Monday morning, Sellars said, "All right, let me do a test." He said it with what we came to know all too well as one of his famous resigned expressions, a look of expectant martyrdom, mingled with one of impending anger if he were proved right, said John. There was a great deal of industrial strife in Britain around that time. The petty bosses of the shop floor, with their subliterate brand of union speak, seemed never off the television screens. Sellars had plenty of good visual copy and verbal infelicities to record on tape, blend together and come up with a proletarian accent, so coincidentally like the real Kite that John Balting, had you shut your eyes, you would have imagined him standing at your elbow. Sellars had his hair cut short, back and sides, the way he had seen his hated warrant officers in the services wear it. He gave himself a Hitler moustache. That was all the makeup he wore. But somehow his face seemed to change shape, physically, become thinner-lipped, bug-eyed, and thick-skulled. Something, though, still eluded him. The characterization didn't snap completely into place till he found the walk, a wooden waddle, slightly robot-like, as if Kite had been wound up with a key in his back to continue along the lines of his ideology, regardless of what obstacles lay in his path. We looked in the dressing room and hardly recognised him, said Roy Bolting. It was another man entirely. But the Boltings noted a somewhat disconcerting feature of that day's discovery of Fred Kite, and the way in which the character grew in the actual shooting. They noticed how eerily the transformation stuck to Sellars, even when he was off the set. He would walk to the studio canteen for lunch, exactly like Kite, leading his yes men across the factory floor, and eat his food the way he imagined Kite did, holding his knife and fork the way Kite might, making table talk of wondrous pomposity and pathetic ignorance the way he heard Kite doing so. He wasn't Peter Sellars anymore. Sellars attributed to this phase in his career his discovery of that weird feeling he had, while playing many subsequent roles, of being taken over by the part, of being possessed. It was as if by realising the latent powers of performance, he had released something or someone that was just waiting to be summoned to creative and sometimes combative life by such a spell. Sellars was frequenting several mediums at this time. In 1959, as his burgeoning career presented him with manifold decisions he would rather have resolved for him by fatalistic resignation and make for himself by the customary show business methods of self-interest. Maurice Woodruff, whom he was seeing every few days, had been joined by Estelle Roberts, a medium he turned to in the hope of contacting the late Larry Stevens, his friend and ex-Goon show writer. The attempt in this case was fruitless, but the experience it gave Sellars of contacting the deceased became very relevant indeed to his filmmaking and eventually central to his life. The uncanny feeling that the medium was possessed by those wanting to make their presences felt from the other side helped Sellars define his own curious and rather frightened reaction to the characters he created. He came to see himself as a form of medium, as if the film characters had entered his body, transfusing his personality so powerfully with their own that they took him over. Being there. Peter Sellars did only one more film after Being There. For Being There, Peter won the National Board of Review Award for Best Actor, the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Actor, a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor, Musical or Comedy, and the London Film Critics Circle Award for Best Actor. He was also nominated for a British Academy Film Award for Best Actor in a leading role and for an Academy Award for Best Actor. Sellars asked to play Chauncey Gardiner, Not only did he understand the book, but he also understood the purpose of the book. It is a book about the tarot card of the Fool. See our video of the Fool. The concept of chance is the same as that of Jung's synchronicity. A gardener is one who tends his garden. See our video on garden symbolism. Alexander Walker. Peter Sellars. Peter later confessed that he had sometimes felt abstracted from the film in an unearthly way, as if he were standing by looking at himself. It reminded him of the time he had died on the operating table and seen himself revived, pulled back again from the spiritual state to the physical being. When Peter walks on water at the end, it is no accidental image he leaves us with. He wishes us to see that stripped of all malice, stripped of all judgmental behaviour, stripped of all erroneous beliefs, stripped of all materialistic or carnal desire, unaware of threats, or at least not bothered by them, believing implicitly in the afterlife, in tune with nature, incapable of hurting anyone, and finding love in his heart for his fellow beings, placid and at ease with himself, egoless and humble. He had become a saint, an angel who could walk on water. He had achieved perfection. As he himself said, a goon is someone with a one-cell brain. Anything that is not basically simple puzzles a goon. His language is inarticulate. He thinks in the fourth dimension.